In the summer of 1958, a young lawyer called Ashok Desai introduced his younger sister, Smita, to a colleague at the bar. His name was Anil Divan. Smita Desai had just returned from a holiday in the Soviet Union, and the two made polite conversation about her trip. Her single takeaway from that meeting was not very favorable. In her words, the imposing 28-year-old Divan came off as snooty. Despite the awkward first encounter, the two became friends. A year of watching movies and dinner dates in Bombay followed. Then one day, sitting in a blue Pontiac, Divan proposed to Smita. Wrapped up in the proposal was a pragmatic warning.
And when he said, Smita, would you like to have a longer relationship? I can only promise you one thing, that you'll always be comfortable, but you'll never be rich. And so I said, Anil, I'm heard that you have very good practice. So what does it mean, that you'll give money out in charity, or you will not charge people, or what do you mean? You'll know only when you get to live with me. And I think what he meant was that he's going to pay his tax fully. He believes in certain morality, which he's going to keep to. And that really touched me. And 2 days before the marriage, we had registered marriage. We were a little odd couple, I think. We didn't want ceremony at all. And Anil told me something very interesting. I said, I have no issue at all with the registered or Vedic Vidhi. But why are you so particular registered? So he said something very interesting, that it gives you equal rights as me in everything. So, and to think on those lines for 58, 59 is, I think, was something unusual.
In perhaps the most romantic moment of his life, Divan might have sounded matter of fact. But more than that, he had shown fairness and honesty, traits that would be the defining characteristics of his personal and professional life in the years to come. I'm your host, Rajiv Chandran. I met Anil Divan when he and his wife Smita moved into the house across our street in Gulmohar Park in South Delhi. Over the years, Anil and I, and indeed Smita, Geeta, and me, all became good friends. Now it is my greatest pleasure to take you through this last and final episode, where we speak to his family, colleagues, and friends to piece together a portrait of the man. How did a commercial lawyer develop an enviable record and become, as Shanti Bhushan once said, the conscience of the bar? And I would add, the conscience keeper of the Constitution. Anil Divan was born on May 15, 1930, to a Gujarati couple in Bombay. His family tree reads like a who's who of legal luminaries. His maternal grandfather, Sir Chimmanlal Setalvad, was an eminent lawyer at the Bombay High Court in the 20th century. Chimmanlal's son and Divan's uncle was Motilal Setalvad, India's first Attorney General. Divan's paternal uncle, B.J. Divan, was Chief Justice of the Gujarat High Court. But in his early years, Divan had no particular interest in the law. His wife Smita reflects.
I think Anil's first choice would have been to join the army, but Anil had a little health problem. He was a very keen sports person, so he started with badminton. He became the Western India teenage champion of badminton. And then when he went to college, he took to tennis. So his second choice was law because there was too much law in the family.
In 1951, Divan finished his law degree from Asia's oldest law college, the Government Law College in Bombay, where he bagged 2 gold medals. In the early years following independence, the Bombay High Court was perhaps the best place to be a practicing lawyer. Divan first worked as a junior under M.L. Manekshaw, a veteran Parsi lawyer with a strict professional ethic and a knack for cross-examination. Even as a young lawyer, Divan gained a reputation for his argumentation and preparation in court. During these years, Sujata Manohar had just joined the bar. Justice Sujata Manohar, as she later became, was among a handful of women lawyers in Bombay in the 1950s. She went on to become the first woman Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court and the second woman to become a judge of the Supreme Court. She tells us about her memories of Divan in his early days.
Anil had, of course, a formidable reputation even in those days as a very good junior who was extremely upright, not willing to compromise on principles, and a very good advocate also. As juniors, we would go to the court to listen to good advocates so that we could learn something, and we would go and listen to him arguing in court. And then I joined the lunch table where he used to sit. It just so happened that way.
That lunch table even had a name.
So it came to be known at the bar as number 10 Downing Street.
That table, where lunch and gossip were shared every afternoon, featured some of the Bombay bar's brightest stars. Senior advocates like Mukund Modi, future judges like J.M. Gandhi, as well as rising stars like Khatu Cooper, Sohini Nanavati, Kusum Haryadi, and of course, Anil Divan. After M.L. Manekshaw's death, Divan inherited much of his vibrant practice as a commercial lawyer. The nitty-gritties of numbers, taxes, and trade excited Divan, as his longtime junior Ranvir Singh tells us.
I remember there was a partner in JBD and company, Ravindra Narayan. Ravindra Narayan and Anil Divan would sit together and would talk endlessly about interpretation of a particular entry. In those days, it used to be HSN entry in the excise law, which used to classify a particular product as A or B. So on classification, there used to be a lot of dispute. So endlessly, Divan would discuss that. And I could see the intellectual pleasure that he would derive from discussing something as dull and drab as Excise Act. So he obviously liked doing commercial matter. I remember when the new Arbitration Act came, people sought opinion from him, and he loved giving opinion on the new Arbitration Act. So commercial side was something which he really liked, and of course constitutional law had become his forte.
In 1972, Divan was designated as a senior advocate by the Bombay High Court. His designation came just as the Supreme Court was on the cusp of creating history. Right after independence, the government and the courts had been entangled in a battle over who could amend the constitution, how, and how much. All of this came to head in the Keshavananda Bharati case, in which hearings began in 1972. Nani Palkiwala led the petitioners in arguing the case, pushing back against the Indira Gandhi government's brazen meddling with the constitution. Divan worked alongside Palkiwala and other eminent lawyers in the groundbreaking case which is sometimes referred to as the mini constitution. If that was the turning point towards Divan's deepening interest in constitutional law, he never spelt it out. But 3 years later, in 1975, when the emergency was declared, his commitment to law and constitutionality would be further strengthened. Divan and other Bombay lawyers were alarmed by the string of preventive detentions and the shrinking of freedoms under the Indira Gandhi government. During this dark period, Divan defended political prisoners in court and was vocal in his commitment to democracy. Did the emergency have a deep impact on his outlook and the work that followed? Vivek Divan, the youngest of his 3 children, weighs in.
I think during those days, it was the freedoms that were being compromised. I mean, basically democracy was at stake fundamentally. And linked to that all was the compromise of the judiciary, everyone kowtowing to this one prime minister and all that kind of stuff. So that was not the world in which he came to become a lawyer. The constitution had a very different vision of all of this. There was a separation of powers and an independence of judiciary, etc. So I think the judiciary for him was this hallowed ground which should be... So, a lot of his litigation in the future also was related to judicial independence, accountability, and all kinds of things.
Vivek referred to his father as a child of the Constitution. Divan entered the legal profession in 1951, just as the Constitution came into being. This meant that it was up to him and his generation of legal professionals to uphold the values enshrined in the nation's founding document. Soon after the emergency was lifted, the Bombay bar grew agitated over a new issue. This time, it was about certain judicial appointments in the top court. Should the 2 Supreme Court judges who sided with the government's crackdown during the emergency be elevated as Chief Justices? On January 7, 1978, several lawyers and activists signed a memorandum opposing the elevation of Justices Y.V. Chandrachud and Justice P.N. Bhagwati. The strongly worded letter outlined how the 2 judges had ruled against civil liberties and supported a harsh regime. Divan was among the 52 signatories to the letter published in the Times of India. Prominent lawyers including Ram Jethmalani, Iqbal Chagla, Atul Setalvad, Khatu Cooper, and A.G. Noorani also signed it. But not everyone wanted to publicly speak out against powerful judges. Smita and Vivek Divan recall what happened.
There were a lot of other senior lawyers who refused to sign. They all criticize, and they not only refuse to sign, but they influence other editors, journalists, not to sign. That don't do that.
I think the point being made is that they were going to practice before these judges who they are saying should not be commended. So there's going to be a direct influence on one's own career. And still there were a few people who signed. And I think that again talks about a certain integrity and a certain, value of the profession. What does the profession mean? What is the role you play in society as a lawyer? I think these are questions which he might not have verbalized in so many words, but I think this is what was, from me, that's my interpretation of this. He was thinking, what are our roles as lawyers? What is democracy? I think that whole period of time certainly ingrained in many lawyers and those like him who were involved in some way or the other with what was going on with the manipulation of the courts and with other political structures, rather, that these are things which should be treasured.
One way to preserve the values of the founding document was by influencing how courts decide on constitutional matters. And where better to do this than the Supreme Court? Beginning in the mid-1970s, Divan gradually shifted base to Delhi. Justice Manohar said the move surprised Divan's colleagues in Bombay. She tells us why.
We were a bit surprised at the time, but actually, looking back on it, I think it was probably the correct thing to do because, of course, commercial litigation was very much the main kind of litigation in Bombay. But that was the start of constitutional law. And the right place where this was going to develop was Delhi. So he must have taken a chance that he would start practicing in Delhi. Most people from Bombay, some of the senior lawyers who shifted to Delhi did so because they got some kind of a government office and they shifted. But Anil decided that he would go there because I think that was the right place where he would get challenging work.
Through the 70s, he moved mainly between the two cities, taking the Indian Airlines flight back and forth each week. In 1979, he moved to Delhi for good and spent the next 10 years living out of a room at the India International Centre. Smita Divan and his 3 young children remained in Bombay. Committed to the public good, Anil Divan was one of the founding members of the Centre for Public Interest Litigation in the late 1980s. CPIL went on to become the country's leading organization providing legal representation for public causes. By the 1990s, Divan had become one of the leaders of the Supreme Court bar. He had also become one of the most sought-after counsels for final arguments in the Supreme Court. The current Chief Justice of the Patna High Court, Justice Sanjay Karol, who was then a young lawyer practicing in Delhi's courts, recalls the image Divan had during those years.
Especially during final hearings. He was one of the most favored counsels at that point in time. So, because the judges, he knew that in final hearings, or everyone knew that as far as final hearings are concerned, unlike the miscellaneous hearings, you have to be very, very thorough, both not only on facts, but also law. And when I say law, means not only the statute and its interpretation, but also the several opinions which would have been delivered on the issue worldwide, not only by the Supreme Court of India, but also different courts of the country and also abroad. So therefore, he was very, very most sought after counsel. And he was not afraid of calling a spade a spade.
Divan feared no one. Not even the most powerful political clients he sometimes represented. He was famous for refusing to pay visits to ministers or politicians, insisting instead that they meet him on his terms and his turf. Smita Divan tells us how he even stood up to the son of a prime minister who he was defending in a case.
So the thing started. Then Morarji Bhai's son thought that he is even higher than Morarji Bhai. His name was Kanti Morarji. So every second day he would telephone Divan and he said, Divan, let me tell you, okay, these things, please don't miss these facts. So Divan heard him once, Divan heard him twice, and then he said, I don't take instructions from my client, I take it through my solicitor. So please go to the solicitor and tell him what you want me to argue. And then I'll decide whether it's worth arguing. He said, I can't take this anymore because I don't want interference from my client. What I argue is my decision. He had that kind of value system that I will not take instructions, so no means no.
It soon became well known that Divan was impossible to be swayed by political influence. The strait made him a coveted lawyer to present petitions against the who's who of government and politics. Divan's most notable takedown of the establishment came in the form of the Jain Hawala case, which, as we saw in the series, was one of the first PILs to deal with corruption. Divan was appointed as amicus curiae, or friend of the court, to help in monitoring the sensitive political investigation. It proved to be his most challenging and his most rewarding brief. During that time, he even met Archibald Cox, the legendary American special prosecutor in the Watergate scandal. The Jain Hawala case launched Divan's lifelong commitment to ending systemic corruption. Sometimes, he even set aside more lucrative briefs to fight this pro bono case. Ranvir Singh, Divan's former junior, tells us more.
On several occasions, he would take up pro bono. A pro bono matter would be listed in the Supreme Court, and a commercial matter would simultaneously be listed in some other court. And they would come in conflict with each other. And it had never happened that he would give up his commitment to a pro bono case to earn money through the commercial cases. So I remember once he was sitting in Chief Justice's court in the third round of the single directive case. And there was another matter in which he was briefed. That also came up as in it was going to be called out. So I went and told him that let's go and do that case first and then we'll come and do this. So he said, Ranvir, that case can be handled by someone else. This is far more important. And he gave up a large fees to attend to a pro bono matter. And this was not one-off instance. On several occasions, he would give up professional assignment, as in a paid assignment, for a pro bono work. Because he said that if I do a pro bono work, I should give 110% to that, so that no one should turn around and say that, oh, he's not charging any fees, that's why he's not giving 100% to it.
The Jain Hawala case cemented Divan's reputation as a staunchly apolitical lawyer. But he faced tremendous pressure during the years he appeared in the case. The family suspected that their phones were being tapped and their home was being spied on. But through it all, Divan was unfazed. Following that case, Divan became more and more sought after to appear for public causes. From the 2000s, Divan cemented his commitment to causes like the RTI, minimum wages, judicial accountability, and of course, his pet cause, corruption. Aruna Roy, a social activist and founder member of the NGO Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sanghatan, collaborated with Divan on several occasions. She tells us about Divan's relationship with civil society.
But I think what made my relationship and association with Mr. Divan so special was the fact that he rose above these smaller categories of affiliations and he was a human being. And I think at the bottom of it all, he was a compassionate person. We had a common understanding of the kind of democratic constraints that exist in India, how important it is for constitutional equality to be established, how important it is to understand the Constitution and how our collective education has kept us all away from understanding constitutional norms to understand the Constitution. So he broke away from the narrow confines of being an advocate, a senior advocate, a jurist, a person who understood jurisprudence, went beyond that to understand democracy and the need for equality to be an ideal towards which we all worked. And there, I think we struck a chord which made us understand each other. And I think that took us a long way.
Roy's colleague, Nikhil Day, who is also a founder member of MKSS, tells us more.
I think it's not just pro bono, it was proactive because it was not free of cost. It was, his contributions in money, in time, in terms of effort, in terms of willing to be anywhere, It's far beyond pro bono. It was far beyond that, okay, I'll stand in court and help you, which some lawyers do, which is also very valuable. He was much more valuable because he was willing to stand by his values anywhere, and in that sense be a part of the activist effort.
All this while, Divan's commercial law practice continued to flourish. On the face of it, commercial law, which deals with things like taxation, corporate contracts, bankruptcy, and insurance, may not seem like the most obvious arena for upholding the principles of rule of law. But Divan's approach showed that the two may be more closely linked than would appear, as Justice Karol tells us.
See, they are linked. In fact, he did not specifically say so, but I realized that this was his thought process, that commercial law was close to his heart, one. Two, he thought that the commercial courts were expeditious disposal of the cases, be it at the interim stage or be it the final stage, was necessary for not only upholding the rule of law but ensuring national growth, rather than having the growth retarded. So he would make sure that whenever a matter would come to the court, he would apply the law with promptitude and not take any unnecessary adjournment, be fully prepared, and have the matter decided at the earliest.
Those like Justice Karol, who spent time at the bar and the bench, had a two-faceted appreciation for Divan. Former Chief Justice of the Punjab and Haryana High Court, Shavak's Vazifdar, who watched Divan as a young lawyer in Bombay, told us that he realized the value of Divan's meticulous preparation even more when he became a judge. He explains why.
He is what I would call a court or a judge's luxury. You really appreciate a person like him more once you become a judge. Because when you're a lawyer, you appreciate it only in that particular matter where you're working with him. A judge doesn't have 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 matters a day. He has a whole lot of matters every day. And if the level of assistance in all the matters was at the same level that Mr. Divan rendered in court, it would make such a big difference. He literally, I would say, exuded reliability. And I would say that reliability and thoroughness were his hallmark. I don't think I've ever appeared with him when he was not fully prepared.
Divan was not only thoroughly prepared, but also painstakingly honest. At times, he even spoke up to his own client's detriment. Justice Vazifdar recalls an incident from the 1980s in the Bombay High Court.
I think there was an incident where the court, it seems, asked a question. The attorneys were responding to it because in the old days, the attorneys and some of the juniors, when there was no space, sat in a bench that faced the counsel with their back to the court. So when the court called them around, he overheard what was being said. And it seems he turned around and said, I don't think they are saying the right thing. I'm going to tell the court what I think is the correct position. And that was to his detriment, but he was an officer of the court first. So if he had to disagree with his own team, he disagreed. On facts, I think everybody relied on him not to make. Even the opposite side would never worry about Anil Bhai saying anything incorrect. They may not agree with his interpretation, his analysis, but never feared that he would pull a fast one or make a wrong statement.
Lawyers like Kamini Jaiswal told us that they viewed Divan as a permanent friend of the court, meaning that they approached him whenever there was a case related to corruption or unethical behavior in public office. It helped that Divan was scrupulously apolitical. He never sided with one political party or another, but strictly stayed true to principles. He guarded both his independence and his client's confidentiality. And in his social life, he actively avoided glibly boasting about his roster of clients. Smita Divan again says,
And I would go to these parties and everyone said, oh, just now the Citibank people had come and just now this Hindustan liver had come, something would come up. And I would say, but this man of mine doesn't even open his mouth. I mean, somebody will think that he's totally briefless person over here. Anil said, I don't want to, I don't have to talk about it.
these steadfast rules of conduct extended to judges too. Even though all judges were lawyers once and have friends at the bar, professional conduct dictates that they cannot fraternize with lawyers. However, not everyone follows this so carefully, and lawyers are keen to boast of their connections on the bench. For Divan, however, this separation was sacred, even if those at the bench had once been colleagues and friends. Ranvir Singh tells us how.
His rule was that he would always call judges for dinner after they have retired. So no sitting judges would ever have the pleasure of dining with Divan at his house, and you could dine with him only after he retired, so that no one would turn around and say that, oh, Divan is socializing and trying to get favors from a particular judge and trying to influence a judge.
At work, Divan was an exacting, often impatient boss. To his children, he was, as Vivek said, a weekend father in the early Delhi years. But he was there when it mattered. In 1995, Vivek Divan told his father that he was gay. Vivek reflects.
For me, it's important now to think about the fact that he was born in 1930. It's a different generation. And he was very hurt that he was not told with everyone else in the family 5 years before when I had told my mother and siblings. He was told after everyone else, and my hesitation was I wanted to be sure that he'd receive it well. And I think he was hurt particularly because of all the people in the family. I should have figured that he would receive it well, because he was always very, very progressive about matters of sexuality, always. He's argued in the case at some point. He has signed public letters of famous personalities saying 377 needs to go. So he's been very, very amazing about it. I think part of it is also that we come from an atheist/agnostic background.
Divan mellowed over the years. He grew more approachable, more amenable to young lawyers, more public-facing. But his commitment was unshaken when it came to corruption, the independence of the judiciary, privacy, and personal liberties. He was also interested in legal discourse and the profession outside the courtroom. He served as the president of Law Asia from 1991 to 1993 and of the Bar Association of India from 2010 to 2014. Divan remained staunchly at work right until he died at the age of 87 from a heart attack in late March 2017. In February, barely a month before he passed away, Divan was busy with the Kaveri river water dispute. He was the main lawyer for Karnataka, and the matter was still pending in the Supreme Court. Ranvir, his junior, tells us more.
See, if there was one case that was really challenging, and I used to spend a lot of time. In fact, ironically, on the last day when he passed away, a day before that, he had called me up and he had said that he would like to work on Kaveri appeals. He was coming from Bombay, so he called me up and he said that, Ranvir, I'm coming today evening, I'm landing, and tomorrow is Sunday. Please do not take up any work. I would like to work for about 3-4 hours on Kaveri brief. So keep yourself free, because I was assisting him in Kaveri matter. So he had asked me to come and brief me.
The bar, the legal profession, and indeed the country lost many things when Divan passed away. His son Vivek distills his essence.
I think the profession has lost a lot of its sheen in terms of the ways in which law is practiced. I think there's a certain ethic to the practice which is lost, not just in terms of hard work, but in terms of his genuine integrity. I think he was a pillar of that. It was so obvious in just his funeral and at the cremation, and it was just so obvious that, because he had no political benefactors, he had nothing. He was himself, and despite that, the incredible kind of outpouring of just respect was boggled our minds. I think there's a certain, how do I say this? It's not integrity, it's a certain independence of spirit. He just was his own man. He wasn't, playing anyone else's tune. He was doing his thing, and there are lesser and lesser of those. I missed him, I know, because when we finally were decriminalized in 2018, with 377 going, I really, really, really wished he was there, because he was a champion and he had put his heart and soul into all kinds of good stuff, not just on that, but on other stuff. So that would have been awesome, but it is what it is.
Anil Divan, truly a shining Indian. We end this episode with a few parting words from the man himself.
But today, friends, we face perilous times with galloping inflation, financial scams, and increasing violence undermining good governance and the rule of law. I will share with you what Nani Palkhiwala stated in 1984 in We the People, and I quote, "The picture that emerges is that of a great country in a state of moral decay. The lifestyle of too many politicians and businessmen bears eloquent testimony to the truth of the dictum that single-minded pursuit of money impoverishes the mind, shrivels the imagination, and desiccates the heart. The tricolour, fluttering all over the country, is black, red, and scarlet. Black money, red tape, and scarlet corruption," unquote. But in the end, Nani Palkhiwala strikes an optimistic note when he writes, and I quote once more, "In the affairs of nations, as in the business of the elements, winds shift, tides ebb and flow, the boat rocks. Luckily, we have let the anchor hold. We have survived as a united democracy, a historic achievement," unquote. The anchor, in my view, has been our constitution and constitutional values.
Thanks to our guests, Aruna Roy, Nikhil De, Ranvir Singh, Justice Sanjay Karol, Justice Vazifdar, Justice Sujata Manohar, Vivek Divan, and Smita Divan. Advisors: Gauri Divan, Ranvir Singh, Shyam Divan, Smita Divan, and Vivek Divan. Research by Ramya Boddupalli, Bhavya Dore and May Mariyam Thomas. Script writing by Bhavya Dore and Ramya Boddupalli. Production by Made in India.